to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast. My name is Tracy Shirk, and I'm curious, have you ever had a situation where you're going, do we need to be strategic here? Do we need to be tactical here? Or do we need a little bit of both? So as we talk about the distinction between strategic and tactical HR, especially as we're growing folks into and through our organization, it's one of those questions that comes up so often. And with me today, I have a very special guest. So Kimeran, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. So Kimeran Johnson is the Chief People Officer with Studer Family of Companies. And Studer Family of Companies is really interesting in the fact that there's so much under the umbrella, from nonprofit organizations to two minor league baseball teams to some amazing shops called Bodacious. So it definitely has this really great mix of retail and hospitality, with some baseball teams and nonprofit all mixed in, which is really fun from an HR perspective.
Totally is, Tracy. It's no day is the same. There's always something new going on. That's for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, Kimeran, I would love for you to share a little bit about your story and your background and how you came into a Chief People Officer role. And I want to name before we go there. So those of you that have followed our podcast for quite some time, Quint Studer was on our podcast, probably about a year ago, and we'll link that in the show notes. And after that podcast, Quint said to me, Tracy, I'm bringing this person on and she's absolutely amazing. And she's going to do so much for our organization. And she doesn't know anything about HR, and that's okay.
That's funny. I'm glad you told me that. He did not, Tracy, and you bring it up occasionally, and you always seem to bring it up at just the right time, because that is all very true. And that I don't know a thing about HR, and I'm very open about it. And it's nice to be reminded that Quint knew that and still knows that, and has not expected me in the year that I've been in the family of companies to become an HR expert. So I'm very appreciative of that.
And the reason why I say that is you were brought in to be that strategic piece to have a huge influence and impact on the employee experience. So when we look at the employee experience throughout, the organization and then how that jives, I'm curious, what has that looked like for you?
Yeah, to kind of go back and touch on my background. So I worked in a training and coaching company for 18 years. And our sole focus was teaching, our target was doctors how to be more relational and create a better experience for their patients and for their employees. And then for the training part, where we were training the staff at these doctors' offices, it was how to be a better employee, team member, and how to create a better patient experience. So even though we did not ever work directly with patients, our whole mission was to make the people in the practice better for the patients. Mm-hmm. So when I met Quint a little over a year ago and just described, they did not have a job opening. I wasn't applying for a job. Actually, as you guys may know, Quint's just an incredibly brilliant person and loves investing in people. So someone connected me to him, and I met with him more just to talk about my next stage in my career, see if he had any insight or direction. And so once we started talking through what I loved and what I feel like I'm good at, and what, as I left the company I was in, right, what people started telling me I was best at, which is not always what you think, right?
Right.
It was coaching, it was building teams, training people. And just my belief is people are capable of more than they'll ever believe in themselves. And I had a mentor that taught me that. And so, once I described that to Clint, he said, wow, we've always needed this role in our company that we've just never been able to find the right person for. And he thought, it would be a good fit for me. So that's how I ended up on board. And, I knew I was coming into what I didn't label at the time, but I can now, a very tactically focused department. And I'm not super tactical. I'm not super detail oriented. I try, I can get in the weeds easy if I get too far down there. So I try to stay out of there. But I've just been groomed in my career to be more strategic, big picture, and more relational. And so, I think what we're going to talk about today and what you've been so influential in helping me identify so that one, I could appreciate what it was and not, feel defeated by it, but also could build the department to serve our family of companies best, knowing this, right? Is that there's strategic HR and there's tactical HR. And I think much more strategically. Some people think more tactically. So I know that's what our conversation is to be about today. And I just love it because, like I said, if I hadn't have realized there was a difference, I think I might have felt like I was failing a lot at this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And isn't it amazing how those voices in our heads will have us show up differently at work, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hold on a second. This doesn't mean I'm failing. It just means that there's a specific need that I was brought in for, and there's another need, right? Like, so when we define the distinction between tactical and strategic HR, they're both needed. However, the tactical HR is truly the foundation of the house, right?
Right.
And it's really difficult to go strategic if you don't have tactical there first, and I think the situation we ran into was, okay, let's take this and build upon what's there while also bringing some amazing people in. You brought some amazing people in this summer and really grew them to bigger than what they thought that they could be. And in a way, I think introduced them to a love of HR, which had never crossed their thoughts.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, I love that you're bringing up the people that came in this summer, right? They were young. I had 3 college students who, all kind of were like, we don't really know what we want to do in life when we grow up. And so I really was excited to just, one, be able to kind of mentor them, not having done everything right myself, but, maybe made a lot of mistakes and could tell them what to avoid and what to move towards. But, they all had an interest in business. I think all of their parents, have an entrepreneurial kind of spirit. And so getting, to put them in an entrepreneurial company. And then, I think one of them in particular that was with us all summer, she was like, I don't know if I want to be in sales, finance, or marketing. And so I think she realized, she said, I never thought about being in HR, right? And I think she left not necessarily saying, I want to be in HR, but she had such a different perspective of business. And I think to kind of really take this theme to the next level, like, I think she realized she is probably pretty tactical and talented at that, but her passion and what gets her excited is around the strategic things. And so, it's just been, again, credit to you, but it's just been cool to be able to explain HR and business, everything kind of in those 2 ways, because it applies in a lot of, areas, just in life even, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at, what you've learned over the last year with this distinction of strategic HR versus tactical HR, and you came in with this, mission essentially of, we want you to grow teams. We want you to do, to do some things to really take us to a very strategic organization with HR. And then you hit a roadblock almost immediately on the tactical. What did you learn from that? And, how would you navigate that differently now?
So Quint says it a lot, and I've heard it before, Quint, and I'm sure a lot of you listening have, but, begin with the end in mind. And I think, that is something that I don't know, even as a strategically focused person who feels like, I don't think tactically, it's easy to still, start and not really know where you're going. And so my looking back, what could I have done differently to navigate it? Or what would I tell anyone else to do to navigate it? Is when you are in the tactical things that, sometimes can be hard, just begin with the end in mind. I think when I look back on some of the projects we've worked on that were tactical that I think went really well, it started with, I'm big on like stand in front of a whiteboard, get some markers, everyone in a room, and like, let's talk out how we're going to attack this. And that's just the way I operate. It's the company I worked in for almost 20 years. And so I think when I came in and was part of a team that didn't operate that way, instead of recognizing what made me good at what I was and making it happen and saying, okay, we're going to sit in front of a whiteboard. We're going to begin with the end in mind. We're going to think strategically and then play it out tactically. Okay, now everybody go do what you're good at. I resisted that because the people around me maybe weren't wanting to do that. And so I tried to do it a different way and truly wasn't effective because I wasn't operating the way I operate effectively. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I love what you just said here. You said, think strategically and play it out tactically.
Yeah.
That was gold, right? So, the other thing that you said was, I know what my strengths are, but I stepped into an environment where I didn't allow the reason why I was hired to shine based on the environment. Those are two huge lights, right? And so often, in our programs, we talk about the distinction between a culture fit to come into the organization and a culture add, right? And you're definitely a culture add. And like just hearing you say, hey, I didn't play to what my strengths were to add to this culture to pull forward. And I think you have now, right? There's definitely some momentum there. But as we talk about these learning lessons to grow, I just love this. Think strategically and then play it out tactically. So tell us more about like what that meant and how you circle back around to that.
Yeah. I think, what it meant is, I appreciate both of these approaches. I actually probably early in my career was more tactical, but worked directly with a very strategic, visionary, big picture. And so I kind of became that. So I can get back to that and appreciate it. But, I believe that great things happen when great people put their heads together and exercise their unique ability, right? And so I'm huge on teams. One of my Clifton strengths is relator. Like I don't do anything well alone. So, if you want me to be at my best, don't put me in an office, at a desk, in a room alone. I need to be on my feet at a whiteboard with other people. Like I'm a talk it out person. And so, I think what I've learned about myself, and Steer Family of Companies is so generous to do lots of different assessments. You've done with me, one with me yourself to, just learn about yourself. But when you understand who you are and you don't try to be someone you're not, and you recognize that other people have strengths that complement yours, I believe that then it becomes all about building the right team that has the right mix of everything you need. And then respecting each other's strengths, letting each other do what they're good at, and not trying to make people good at something they're not. And I would say from an HR, I'm probably getting a little bit off track of where you're going, but from an HR perspective, both as an HR professional building a team, as an executive who's maybe hiring an HR professional to build a team or helping guide that person, and for people who are just hiring in general, right? Like, don't try to hire. It seems so logical, but like, don't try to hire or to get someone you've hired to do things that go against their strengths, because not only are you not going to get what you need, but you're going to put that person in a lot of conflict, which has a lot of ripple effects. Mm-hmm. And the way I've, to circle back around to it, we kind of like literally turned over the basket and dumped all the fruit out in our department at the beginning of the summer. And literally like we're starting from scratch. And it wasn't a big department to start with, But, I felt like our ownership knew we needed a pretty drastic change. I agreed with a pretty drastic change. We made it, and it got way harder before it got easier.
Isn't that the way with any change, though? It's like, okay, do we know what we're stepping into? Are we ready? Yeah. And here's the light at the end of the tunnel. You started that journey with the end in mind. Because I remember when you called me and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. What are the unintended consequences of this? What do I not know that I'm going to need to know? I'm like, tactical HR, Kimeran, tactical HR.
Yeah. And, I've told you this, but I feel like I can't tell you enough. I mean, the summer of 2022 was probably the hardest job I've had since I was brand new in the company I worked for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And, it was some of the most rewarding times, but also some of the most frustrating. And, you and your team who jumped in and helped were 100% supportive and what helped me get through tactically. Because I told someone the other day, I was like, HR, other than like being a doctor, flying a plane, standing in a courtroom, being an attorney, but from just kind of a general business sense, which I've always just been in general, business, HR is the one job I don't think you can fake. If that makes sense.
Yes.
So like I'm really good at winging it. I'm comfortable winging it. Sometimes I thrive on it. And I've done a lot of jobs. I mean, I've been a salesperson. I've managed a sales team. I've been a CMO. I've been a marketer. I've managed a product. I've launched a product. I've done speaking engagements. I mean, it was humbling, Tracy, because I think I thought like, okay, I've done everything. Like, I can do this. Come on. And I mean, we got through it. I'm still alive. No one killed me. I didn't kill anyone, but you can't fake that job. Right. You can't fake being an HR professional. And when you're in an organization that's doing as many things as ours is doing and moving as fast as we move, and we have really high standards for our supervisors and our people, you almost like some things you can like learn like one step ahead of what you need to do. And I don't even know that was possible. So I learned a lot about what I didn't know, about what I never want to know, fell on my face a ton. But to tie this back all together, it made me that much clear on what our department needs in order to be both strategic and tactical, and what I would say relational and transactional, to serve our family of companies. And so now we've identified these positions. We've hired one. We're hopefully, if all goes well in the next few days, about to make an offer on another. And I'm like, finally, I feel like it's the roles we need and the type of people we need. And we've thought about it, like you said, with the end in mind, which is we have to be able to provide both of these approaches.
Absolutely. One of the things we did along the way is really looking at what does winning look like, for the end, but what does winning look like throughout the process? And I think so often we forget where are those kind of mile markers in the process to ensure that winning is outlined within that, especially as, we look at, hey, hiring individuals into it or promoting them up through the organization is one of those of how do we set this up? And without well-defined benchmarks as to what winning looks like, you can't do that, right? And that's both strategic and tactical. And so often we have the tactical things, hire 22 people or do whatever, but strategically, who cares if you hire 22 people if they're not the right people to meet those business outcomes?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I've always been a big fan of assessments. We used to do one in the company I was at where, you got an A, B, C, D, or F. And, our company policy was if it's a C, D, or F, you don't move forward no matter how much you like them. And so you introduced me to predictive index, which I actually believe is probably the best assessment I've come across, just in the sense that I think it's dimensional. The one that I'm familiar with is a little more one-dimensional. I feel like predictive index has, more angles to it. It not only helps you hire right, but I'm not quite all the way into it, but it helps you, manage and coach right.
Absolutely.
And, from what you've shown me, it's reasonably priced, right? I mean,
Right.
it's something most companies can afford. And there's a lot of things out there that are really costly. So that's
Absolutely.
been huge.
Yeah. And for our listeners, in the show notes, if you haven't taken the predictive index yet, we do have a link there for you to do that. So there's that shameless plug, right? But it's one of those where it really transformed your team and helped you understand, what do we need to bring into our team? The best example I have of predictive index actually with your team is your intern for the summer and a member of our team, Danielle, were not getting along. They were like oil and water. And it was kind of hilarious. You and I are standing back. We're like, are we watching a train wreck or what's happening? And I'm like, well, no, hang on. Let's pull their PIs and let's look at it. I took a step back and, really coached Danielle on her team about it and said, hey, here's her PI, here's what she needs, and so with that, and they were pretty opposite as to what their natural behaviors were. And so Danielle and I came up with a plan essentially based on something called a management strategy guide that you can pull right out of predictive index of how she can work with her in order for her to be successful. And what happened over the next week, I think you and I both sat back and watched and were like, well, this is amazing.
Yeah. And I think what was cool is we got out of the way,
Yes.
but we were comfortable getting out of the way because, you didn't coach her on what you thought she needed, right? Or
Right.
You coached her on what the system told you she needed and you just brought it to her attention. So
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in most of the time you need facts over feelings. It's like I'm a very feeling based person. So I love tools that give me the facts so that I can set my feelings aside and, let the facts play things out. So,
yeah, when you have 50 years of data and science behind it, and the people data tells you this, and you do it and you're like, completely different outcome. Okay, I'm bought into that.
Yeah. And I think too, we used it and we were, testing it with the roles in our department strategically, right? Our approach was, hey, predictive index could really serve our company well. We have a lot of supervisors who hire people who have no hiring experience, right? And so, I was well aware coming in that just our organization as a whole is young and quite inexperienced in leadership, which is what I think is cool. Is Quint loves to put people in positions that maybe no one else has put them in because he believes in them and he knows that his organization will help coach them to get better. So I think that's so cool. But the tough side of that is you've really got to have a way to teach these people and feed them what they need. And so, having a tool like predictive index to help our supervisors select correctly or select smart is key. And so, we went in saying, hey, what I would have loved to have done is just say, okay, we're on board and we're going to push it out to all these people and we're going to tell them they should like it. But, you helped coach through, okay, let's use this for this department. Let's experience it. Let's fall in love with it, right? Great way to sell. Let's fall in love with it. And then we'll be able to talk about it from, an experience, not just what we're, theoretically what it will do. And so, now to put predictive index in our organization and be able to say, I was going to hire 2 people, had I have just based off an interview, I would have hired these 2 people. But once we looked at their predictive index score, we realized, ooh, that could be dangerous, right?
Right.
So all those experiences, I think, will help us hopefully get this brought into the company, select right, and manage better.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot today. We went from strategic to tactical, how we bring folks in and kind of move them through the organization. So what's, a takeaway based on our conversation for executives listening in today?
This is probably more than you're asking for, but I think executives need to recognize their tendency, whether it's to be strategic or tactical. They need to recognize that hiring someone just like you is not always the best thing. And to recognize that I believe in an HR department, you need someone who thinks more strategically and someone who thinks tactically. And so just to be aware of that, right? If I'm an executive and I need to go hire an HR professional, I need to know who I am. I need to be intentional about which one of those I'm trying to hire. And then I need to remember what I hired as I work with them down the road and not try and turn them into the thing that I knew they weren't, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And getting that leadership team to buy into that, knowing, hey, there's either a change coming or this is going to be status quo, but I need to have your buy-in into this because we all need to support this culture add versus a culture fit that we've had in the past.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's an insight from today for our HR professionals listening in, other than they've had like 72 light bulbs go off?
I mean, similarly, right? You can tell this is really relevant to me right now and I'm passionate about it. But similarly, like knowing which way you lean and embracing that and not trying to be something you're not, but then building around you the people who are going to be more of what you're not.
Yeah.
So not saying, well, I'm tactical and that's who I am and I'm going to embrace that. And I'm just going to win this battle being tactical.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you need some strategic thinking. So go find that person, right? Even it's not a hire. It may just be a person that you bring in a couple times a week to just sit and talk things out with you, right?
Yeah.
So I think similar, right? Similar advice to both.
Awesome. Well, Kimeran, it is always a pleasure to chat with you and to work with you and to see how much you and your department and the impact of that has had throughout the organization on the little ripples. Like we had Heidi, our admin coordinator, had a conversation with one of your staff members the other day here in Beloit, and they're like, the change that has happened over the summer has changed our lives because we now get what we need. And that's so cool to hear. So kudos to you and your team for what you have created. And so for our listeners, thank you so much for listening in today. And by the way, if you're going, hey, we know we need to implement some hire strategies inside of our organization, we are launching our Talent Optimization Foundation Hire Program, which is a 6-month program where we take you through all the different ways and things that you need to truly build that foundation in your organization in order to hire individuals effectively, from how to create an employee value proposition to tying in your mission, vision, values to very specific HR laws and what that looks like as far as, sending out offer letters and rescinding offers and background checks and all the fun things. It's all in there. So if that interests you, that link will also be in the show notes. And again, Kimeran, thank you so much for being with us. And we will see you next week.
Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.